afternoon. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. Here's my co-host, Dave Bernstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing, man?
Well, somebody seems to want to part the Red Sea.
Mhm.
Uh, is dropping enough munitions to alter the course, at least in the northern part, and made a little bit of a mistake. Did you see that one?
We're talking about the communications leak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I thought that was fun. That was incredible, man. At the highest levels of government, Defense Department, leaking information about a top secret war plan. I mean, and yeah, it was just such incompetence, Dave. For those that may not know the story, uh, the magazine The Atlantic released the revelation that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, discussed sensitive information about Yemen bombing plans with other senior Trump officials on a messaging app in a group text that mistakenly included the publication's editor-in-chief, a guy named Jeffrey Goldberg. In other words, you got the Secretary of Defense, top officials of the Trump administration talking about a bombing plan in Yemen over a group text, and they invited a journalist, albeit inadvertently, but nevertheless, somehow that happened. There's a journalist on the call where the Secretary of Defense is talking about top secret military activity. Not just activity, but an actual operation. Stunning, stunning development. No.
Well, there are two different parts of that.
Mm-hmm.
One part is that the Department of Defense, to maintain operational secrecy and so on, has a slew of very heavy protocols to make sure accidents like this don't happen. But the Secretary of Defense and his aides and his peers and the Vice President said, forget about secrecy. Forget about protecting the information. Too much work. We might have to go to the room down the hall that's secure. Let's just use Signal, which has encryption built in, and that's all we need to protect our secrets. That is utter and total nonsense.
Not
And
just nonsense, according to some of the stuff that I'm reading, David. It's a violation of law and security protocols. I mean, yes, it's stupid, but it's also a violation of law to
now,
discuss such sensitive stuff on a public network, albeit encrypted, but public nevertheless.
the king can do whatever he chooses to.
Hmm.
His people believe they can do whatever they choose to. This is
Yeah.
500 years ago in England. Actually, no, more than that, because Queen Elizabeth I had to deal with Parliament on a whole lot of things. So I think we're going back to the divine right of kings that is being asserted, all of which I'll leave you to have an opinion on, but I can give you one thing. It's an easy mistake to make. I wanted to send an email to one person who was part of my list of government officials who was subscribed to DSL Prime. There was a big news story that broke when MCI went bust. And I stayed up all night to write it up. And that morning, I intended to send it to one person. Accidentally, I sent it to everybody on my government officials list.
Oops.
One of whom was Dave Farber,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
who's in people's list picked it up, and he sent it out to 25,000 of the most interesting technology-oriented.
Now, what was the content of this email, Dave?
The content of the email was tearing apart what was really going on MCI's bankruptcy and fraud.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, Bernie Ebbers went to jail for it.
Mm-hmm.
So there should have been a number more. So that but it was a total rough draft.
Mm-hmm.
I sent it out to get an opinion. It wasn't ready to be published.
Wow.
There was nothing but the rough draft. You know, it went to Dave. Dave at that point was working at the FCC. He was chief technologist.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought that it was right on target. And so he forwarded it to his list.
Mm-hmm.
I don't bet, except for one thing. I said something rude about one of the analysts and the quality of his reporting. I said something like, all he does is copy press releases or something like that. And he hasn't forgiven me 20 years later.
Wow. Well, you know, Dave, I'm sure we've all made those kinds of mistakes. I can remember some time ago, I was sending a business email. I forget the exact content of what it was, but it was fairly sensitive, querying about strategy. And I sent it to Phil such and such. I won't leave the name blank, but I mistakenly sent it to one of my other contacts named Phil. Now, fortunately, the mistaken Phil kind of had a little bit of background about our business and kind of reacted appropriately. And I was able to recover from that error. But the point is, though we all have made those kinds of mistakes, Dave, we don't work for the Defense Department. We don't have high-level security clearances. We don't make hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect this country. So, you know, you and I making this kind of mistake, that's one thing. The Secretary of Defense, the cabinet, high-level government officials in charge of the security of the U.S., there's no excuse. I'm sorry. There, you know, I think you're right. The first thing you said was that they shortcutted the communication process by using the Signal app for a group chat, when they probably should have gone into one of the secure rooms somewhere in the White House or some other government facility where they don't have to worry about folks getting in that don't have the proper authorization, where the system itself is tightly controlled and monitored. But they didn't do that. So, you know, I did not give them a pass for an inadvertent mistake like that. Sorry.
Well, I'll defer to you on that because I could have done it, but I wouldn't be sitting in the Department of Defense office doing it.
Right.
Not where you're supposed to do it. Now, this made clear that they're using Signal because they wanted to have something real easy to use, real convenient, no secure rooms or problems like that. And so they went to Signal. Signal is a nonprofit sponsored mail program that is known for doing a very good job of encryption. So that was a sensible choice. Now, should you use Signal to protect yourself and the people who are trying to intercept you? Well, given some of the politics that's been happening lately, I would want to encrypt a whole lot of things, I might say. And your friend Albert Cox-Hahn was quoted in the Washington Post today about why Signal is a good thing for people to use to protect their privacy. I think I sent that over to you.
Yeah. Albert Foxconn, who we've had on this program a number of times, as well as some of his other staff from STOP, the Securities Technology, I think, opposition program, where they monitor privacy throughout New York City and the U.S. for that matter. Anyway, he wrote an interesting piece that talks about some of the steps that we as average regular consumers should take to protect our privacy. He notes probably what's obvious, but many folks may not, really focus on the fact that, our phones are connected 24/7 to the cell tower. And there are so many apps on the phone that track us, that track our location. So there's a lot of data that's available over the cell phone network about us and our activity before we even make a call or do anything, just kind of sitting still. It relays information about where we are, the frequency of our use of the device, what kind of information we're sending over the device. Anyway, Foxconn talks about, lays out a number of steps about in a number of areas. One regarding location data. He says never take your work phone to a sensitive site and avoid taking even your personal device if you're particularly concerned. So, in other words, leave the device at home if you're going somewhere sensitive.
Sensitive. Times Square for a demonstration at the United Nations.
Yeah.
March to a demonstration. And remember, there are people in jail right now.
Mm-hmm.
Primary crime was being a demonstrator and maybe even criticizing killing 50,000 Palestinians is not right.
And, given what we've learned from Foxconn and some of his staff, the authorities have the ability to go to Google and do a mass data grab and get all of the information about whomever was at for instance, what you just mentioned, a demonstration site or any other location. They can lay out a geographic area as small as a room or as big as a city. They can define a time frame and collect all that data about who was there and what they were doing on their devices. So, yeah, that. You might want to leave your device home, or at least make sure your location data is turned off. I don't know, Dave, that you can be protected from the mass data sweep, even if your location data is turned off. Your phone is still on.
Well, you want to make it harder.
Yeah.
You can't. There are a lot of things in world that you can't stop, like delivering fentanyl to the west side of Manhattan. It's impossible to stop that kind of thing, but you could possibly reduce it. And these are recommendations to reduce the problems of you being watched, listened to, and surveilled.
Yeah, a couple other specific recommendations are that you periodically audit all the apps on your phone, removing any apps that you don't regularly use. Also, that you review the location sharing setting for apps. So many apps, even things like camera apps, photo apps, things that you would not think care about your location. Many of them ask permission to know your location. You need to disable the location services for any apps that don't need access. For me, the only one that might need access is your map. But most other apps do not need to know where you are in order to use the app. And then the last piece that Foxconn talks about in terms of location data is be wary of sharing your location using any friends' family location tracking tools, such as Life 360. I'm not familiar with that one, but apparently it's a family location sharing app that allows family members to know where other family members are. And if they know where you are, so can potentially everyone else.
Now, should you use Signal to protect the privacy of your email? Well, the Secretary of Defense was absolutely wrong in trusting Signal. Signal is a heavily encrypted application.
Mm-hmm.
It's not clear that even the NSA could crack the encryption on Signal.
Really?
the capabilities of the NSA against heavy encryption are not really known, but most people, and I'm talking about the people who do things like write encryption software, think that they can't be cracked today or the next few years. Does that mean that if you send an email via Signal, the United States NSA or the Chinese, Iranian, or North Koreans couldn't intercept that?
Mhm.
It turns out that even if they can't crack the encryption, which is all that most people think is involved, somebody with the, well, not somebody, a nation state security apparatus that can put 20 professional hackers onto a job, 100 if they need it. And I bet the NSA had 100 people cracking Huawei. And we have 100 people trying to crack all of the defense, the Chinese defense thing. And the Chinese have the same quality tracking us. And it turns out that even if your encryption is rock solid, usually a nation state capable team can crack whatever you have on your phone and whatever your email is. They may not crack Signal, but they'll crack something else on your phone, use that to drop a keylogger or some other program onto your phone that tracks what your password to get into Signal is, even if it can't crack Signal itself.
Wow, that's scary, Dave.
I do not believe that anybody, well, any ordinary, even technically competent person could keep the NSA out of their email. Now, most of the time, they won't bother coming after you for that. But given how many people are being sent to jail for what they say today, that's the situation in America, and it's probably going to get worse.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You have to be aware that even with the best encryption, the government can crack it probably.
And let me just also mention, I'm just going back to Foxconn's article again. He talks about a couple other platforms other than Signal. One is WhatsApp, who a lot of folks use, and they have end-to-end encryption. But one of the things that Foxconn points out is that they fail to encrypt the metadata about your conversation. Metadata is who you communicate with, when, and where, and from, leaving all that data exposed. Even though they don't have the actual content, they know who you talk to, when you talk to them, and where you're calling from, location-wise.
I bring to the show the old story about the surveillance of the Irish Republican Army.
I don't remember that. Refresh my memory, and I'm sure our audience as well.
Okay. The U.S. government was tracking the Irish Republican Army, which people in New York, a couple of whom were friends of mine, even though I was never involved with what the IRA was doing. And there was a heavy-duty FBI surveillance of the people who might have been raising money for the Irish Republican Army during the Troubles. So as I say, I had some friends who almost certainly were being observed at that point. What do you do with metadata? Well, they figured out that somebody was an important part of the Irish Republican Army network in the United States, in New York. How did they figure that out? And I have the story from some of the people that were involved. Well, this guy's phone number or email was found connected by 4 of the other people that the FBI knew were active in the IRA. So he was connected to so many members of the IRA, he must be somebody important. Now, can you guess who he was and how that happened?
How about a reporter named Dave Burstein?
No, although that could have been, but I wasn't involved with the IRA at any point, other than, you know, go and listen to Black 47 in a club or something. No, he was a tailor.
Oh my goodness.
who was active in the IRA, thought he was a great tailor, and recommended him to all his friends. Some of who were leaders of the IRA. And that showed up in the FBI surveillance, or so I was told. And the FBI thought that this tailor, who was not political, was a leading member of the IRA support network in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you can do with metadata. Now, putting him on the surveillance is one thing. That is being done now routinely to kill dozens of people.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I can't prove this. This is obviously all very highly classified, but I know how these systems work and what they can do. How does the the Russians or the Israelis decide that somebody becomes an active target? Well, we know that there is heavy-duty AI, often supplied by Google, being used by the Israelis as part of their war effort. And the Russians and the Ukrainians also are using a lot of AI. AI is now a primary war tool. We see it in particular on the drones, including the underwater drones that are there. So, how does, I'm guessing, but it's almost impossible, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. How does the Israeli army decide which house to bomb? Remember, we just passed 50,000 known casualties, and the real number is probably higher than that. Mm-hmm. They are monitoring every cell phone in Gaza. They are monitoring every email in Gaza, and they're looking at things like who's connected to whom, and if you happen to be arranging a wedding for the sister-in-law of somebody in Hamas, you may very well be contacting and inviting a whole lot of people in the community, some of whom are in Hamas. Does that show up on the Israeli screen that you're a natural target and involved in Hamas? I am almost sure that...
Sounds highly likely, Dave. I'd have to agree. Now, let's bring that home. I know that stuff is rampant on the military bases overseas, but coming home here in the U.S., we're starting to see more and more surveillance and more of the government reaching out to deport, to really to mess with. I wanted to use a bad word, but I'm not going to use a bad word, but to mess with people on so many levels. And I'm wondering, whether or not some of this cell phone and internet surveillance is going to impact, the monitoring of non-white Europeans here in the U.S., immigrants, Spanish-speaking folks, Black and brown folks. It's getting a little close to home from what I see in terms of
I'm sitting 50 yards away from Columbia University in a Columbia-owned building that my apartment happens to be in. At Columbia, the latest thing is that the feds have insisted that Columbia have a strict rule against anybody on campus wearing a mask, probably even including on Halloween.
Mhm.
Why? Because they want to be able to take a picture of who is at a demonstration. In this case, it's probably a demonstration about Palestine, but it could be about housing in New York,
Mhm.
and use facial recognition and artificial intelligence to figure out who was there.
Mhm.
That works.
Yeah,
Facial recognition.
and they used a $400 million threat against the university. We're talking about Columbia University now. The government threatened to pull $400 million in federal funding if the university did not comply with that mask directive that you're talking about right there, Dave.
And the news today, I think I saw it in the Times, is that the government is asking for the identity of all foreign students at universities,
Really?
what country they came from.
I hadn't seen that one. Wow.
Yeah, that was just in the news this morning.
Boy, this is sounding more and more like a roundup, Dave. It's from wow.
No, it can't happen here.
No, yeah, right. It is happening here. But Dave, we got to take a break. We're about at the halfway point.
Okay, we're going to try not to get to these painful things too much. We're going to recognize them because they're part of what community and technology should be covering. But we have a lot of much more interesting positive things, including how easy it is to run heavy duty artificial intelligence software at home.
Okay.
After the
Stay
break.
tuned. This is Community and Technology, Dave Burstein and Stu Reed on WHCR 90.3 FM. We'll be right back after a brief musical break. Stay tuned. we're back. Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reed here on WHCR 90.3 FM. Dave, you said before the break that you had some positive news about some developments in AI. What's going on?
I have lots of news about developments in AI, but one of them is really dramatic. You can run a heavy-duty, state-of-the-art, frontier, top-of-the-line LLM, large language model, on a Macintosh Studio computer
Well,
at
wait a
home.
minute, Dave. Wait a minute. You're talking about running one of these huge AI models that they have spent billions of dollars developing can run on a home Mac device. Is that what you're telling us?
Yep, absolutely. At about 20 words a second. So you run it for 30 seconds and you've got 500 words, which is more than enough to answer most questions. This is one of the things that is happening and has lots of consequences back and forth. First, let me explain how that happens.
Okay.
Cannot build you can build a lightweight model, but you can't build a heavy duty model at home. But you can take one of the existing heavy duty models that are released as open source and flexible and documented and run it and get your answers on a much smaller machine.
Dave, break it down for us neophytes. How does running one of these large models that you're talking about, how does that differ from, the off-the-shelf use of maybe a chat GTP or some other AI that's available to consumers over their home PC? What's the
It's
difference?
darn close.
Hmm.
Uh, DeepSeek blew the minds of people in Washington by it's a Chinese outfit, put 25 brilliant young Chinese, they've been putting together the team for a number of years, and came up with a model that when they threw it at the benchmarks was definitely comparable to top of the line ChatGPT type models. This was predictable. In fact, I have predicted, and I've predicted on the show. But the news I'm bringing here is that once somebody, DeepSeek, Facebook's Llama, or Alibaba's Qwen, or half a dozen other big models are created at a cost that might be $5 million, might be $100 million, and maybe at the ones that are planned for this year may even be more than that. Once that model is created, you can run it to get your answers on a much smaller model. And in fact, hackers have been doing this on heavy-duty home PCs. One I remember took 4 of the previous generation Macintoshes, put them all together, and was able to run a heavy-duty model. Heavy-duty models can fool most people about whether they're human or a computer. They can reproduce your voice so well. Reporter at Joanna Stern at the Wall Street Journal got a voice synthesizer running and fooled her own mother. I could keep going on, and we have talked about the many, many things that AI can do and more things. What I'm bringing to the show is that you can get very close to $100 million worth of computer power answering your question, talking to you, telling you the right exercises to use to 2 months after you fractured your hip and you're healing pretty well. What exercises can you change to? Something that I asked before. It can write better term papers than the average college undergraduate, according to one set of university professors who tested it. We know that, and on the show, we've talked a whole lot about what it can't do and the dangers and the biases and the problems. But that's another thing. But what's happened is that now that the big models are available, complete weights, open source, I can go, in fact, I did go to any of 2 servers and download the whole thing onto my machine. Now, my machine is not the same as a $5,000 or $10,000 Mac Studio. It would run slower than the 20 seconds, or I can reduce it from the great big model to a distilled version that's not quite so big and run it on a computer or run it on your cell phone.
Wow.
Now,
So what you're saying, David, sounds like, if I can, just kind of summarize what the impact of this, it sounds like there's been a massive increase in the AI capability that's available to the average consumer. Am I hearing you right?
not hooking up to a great big data center in the cloud.
Mhm.
You can run this stuff. Now, we've been talking about this for a while. All the high-end cell phones now, and it's getting into the mid-range ones too, have AI capabilities built in. In some cases, like Google, they actually added a chip just to do the AI. Now, that is not a 70 billion parameter model, but it can be pretty darn good. And the example I like to give of what's possible now, although Apple hasn't got it working quite right, is I could be talking on my phone and you could be hearing it in French or Chinese as I talk.
Wow.
There's a little bit of a delay in the
Mhm.
stuff on now doing that kind of thing, but that's the kind of thing that was there.
I guess
And
theoretically it'll work back the other way as well. I can be speaking with a Chinese person in my native language, in their native language, and we're having a two-way conversation back and forth. Wow.
yep, that is absolutely doable. It runs a little bit slow on the cell phones and even some of the stuff going to the heavy duty machines in the cloud.
Mhm.
That works just fine. And I know it because we've all heard the fabulous stuff of the voices that are there. And
Mhm.
I read a dozen articles a day in Chinese and in German and in French.
Mhm.
And translation now is so good. Sometimes I don't know whether it was written in
Mhm.
German, English in the original.
Mhm.
Usually you can find 1 or 2 things that are not quite right,
Right.
but it's that good.
Mhm.
Now, the numbers that we're using, well, Dario Amodei, one of the best in the business, founder of Anthropic, says that everything in AI is getting 4 times better each year.
Well, this is the new Moore's law of AI.
Yep.
Hmm.
And
Moore's law was
but
doubling every year, right? This is quadrupling.
it was doubling every year and a half or 2
Okay.
years, and it's
Hmm.
down. And that's about half because the hardware is getting better. NVIDIA is doing a fabulous job upgrading the hardware, and
Hmm.
there's several companies that are almost as good. But NVIDIA is totally dominating it everywhere except in China right now. And the software to do it, I get a daily readout of the new papers in artificial intelligence. And some days there are 35 of them because there are at least tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of people around the world working to make AI better. Google's got 5 or 10,000 of them.
Mm.
AI has 1,000.
So
When you add,
the rate of increase of its efficiency and capability is increasing at an astounding rate. I know we have talked on the show, Dave, about maybe 5, 10 years out, we may have some general intelligence in AI, where the AI can actually emulate human thinking and human problem solving. Listen
um,
to you talk about the rate of development now. It sounds like that might be even closer.
right at this point, the AIs are smarter than the best humans in some important ways.
Really.
They beat the world champions in chess
Mhm.
and in and they beat generations of biologists and chemists trying to come up with the structure of the 200 million known proteins.
Mhm.
That's AlphaFold because a protein has 60, 500, 10,000 amino acid units all folded together into a very complex three-dimensional structure. And AlphaFold has solved that problem for 90% of the proteins identified by science. And that's why Demis Hassabis got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry this year.
Mhm.
He and John Jumper had come up with that. Now, we're talking about, you mentioned AGI. The term turns out to be meaningless, although everybody's using it. But it turns, when you look at what they mean by it, it turns out that the people at Google mean something totally different than the people at OpenAI, and everybody disagrees with
Talking
it.
about general intelligence now in
General intelligence
AI.
is how do you define intelligence? It's much more than an IQ test. They have a whole lot
Yeah.
of tests, and they're working it. But then, are we talking about general intelligence being the intelligence of the average guy in the street? Well, Demis John Jumper actually did better than literally hundreds, possibly thousands of chemists and biologists who've been working at doing those proteins one by one, and they did 100 million of them on the computer in a few months.
Mhm.
That's smarter than the smartest chemist and biologist could do.
So what's the impact going to be, David? I mean, given you say it may not be general intelligence, but what's
It's,
your reading of where we're going with this in 5 years, given the breakneck speed of the current development technology?
I can't answer that question.
Hmm.
Nobody can give you a good answer to that question. Dario Modi, who founded Anthropic, one of the key companies doing this stuff, thinks we may be there in 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Don LeCun, who's the chief scientist at Meta and also a professor here at NYU, just did a speech on why we need some breakthroughs in order to get up to that level.
Mm-hmm.
That there are things that we're not going to be able to do, and we're not going to be to general intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has different thoughts on what's going to happen when.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to know. We know it is moving incredibly fast.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, I get 35 papers a day, and no, I can't read them all. In fact, it's hard just to read the
Yeah.
titles of all.
Yeah. Yeah,
Anyhow,
I wanted to talk a little bit about, we're talking about AI. I want to talk a little bit, I saw a story about heavy users of Chat GTP and what's going on with that in terms of increasing loneliness and emotional dependence and reduced social interactions because of the dependence on these AI models, Dave, for their personal conversations and personal interactions. What's going on with that?
Well, we know that the AI models are getting so good that some people are falling in love with them. And we brought that to the show, and it's happening more and more, and it's going to be happening much more and more. Even when you know it's a computer on the other end, it's so much like a human being,
Mhm.
and it likes you.
Yeah. And from what I'm looking at, developers are actually focused on that day. This is not a byproduct or a happenstance. They're really courting folks to fall in love with, quote unquote, or at least to seek emotional connections with the chat GTP.
Okay. The news story this week is that the people behind ChatGPT, OpenAI, working with a team at MIT, came up with a study, fairly serious study, decent number of subjects, 1 to 3,000, I think,
Mhm.
and found not that working with the chat GPTs and the models makes you lonelier, but that the people who work with them heavily are usually lonelier. Probably because the people who get totally into ChatGPT, people who use it really heavily and don't have a, a business or science need for it, are the people who are lonely in the first place.
Wait, are you talking
Just
about the developers or the users? You lost me on that.
users.
Okay,
That
user, the end
percentage
users.
who are using ChatGPT are lonelier than most of the general population.
Okay, that's who's attracted to it. That's the point you're making.
Yeah, and that makes
Hmm.
perfect sense. Who spends 20 hours a week playing video games?
Right. Hmm.
Often that's people who don't have satisfaction in their own social life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is pretty dramatic. The MIT people were saying we got to be aware of it and we've got to make sure that people don't get too addicted and that there's some controls in place.
Yeah, but Dave, that sounds like the alcohol company saying drink responsibly.
I didn't disagree with you, but
Hmm.
the evidence is not there at this point that it makes you lonelier.
Hmm.
The evidence is there, however, that lonely people get deeply involved.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting.
That's the stories. Now, let me go through a couple of things just because it's stuff that we should be covering in this show.
Hmm.
One, the 23andMe, the company that was the first to go heavy into consumer DNA analysis and have done DNA analysis on millions of people, just went bankrupt yesterday, but we knew it was coming. What's going to happen to all those DNA records of millions of people? There's lots of arguments on that, but the California Attorney General, and it's a California company, said the first thing, even before they went bankrupt, the first thing you do is tell them to delete your record because your DNA can show that you're more likely than somebody else to get Parkinson's disease,
Hmm.
for example. And the insurance companies would love to cut off everybody with that kind of DNA.
Hmm.
The DNA can show something about your ancestry. Some places that's pretty dangerous. In Burma right now, excuse me, Myanmar, they are killing the Rohingya, a large tribe. I think there are millions of them, a group of people who've been a separate group of people for hundreds of years and could probably be pretty much distinguished from the DNA profile. Not 100% accurate, but enough to the point that,
What's that group,
well,
Dave? Dave, I'm sorry, I missed you.
Rohingya in Myanmar, where
Okay.
the uh, Buddhists are killing the Muslims
Hmm. Hmm.
by the thousand.
Hmm.
Not so much news. That, in fact, a lot of that went over Facebook. one of the reasons we don't trust social networks, although social networks also do good things. Now, you said before about the cellular spies. Well, law enforcement across the United States and many other countries have catchers that can fake out your phone and intercept all your connections to the cell tower. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has built software, open source, called Ray Hunter, to see whether somebody is intercepted.
Yeah, those they call those stingrays, if I'm not mistaken, Dave, which is why the Frontier is calling them ray hunters.
Yep.
Yeah, Stingray is the technology that simulates a cell tower, acts like a cell tower, intercepts your phone calls, and collects your data.
Yep.
So Frontier has a way to identify them, Dave. Is that what they got? No.
They came with Ray Hunter software to tell whether you're being intercepted before it gets to the cell
And
tower.
you can put that on your phone?
I guess on your phone. I didn't catch that. Now, I think we're about the end. It's time for the kickers at the end of the show.
Just about. Just got a couple minutes left here.
Good. The congestion pricing is doing a lot of good things, including lagging the traffic, and the buses go much faster. And attendance at Broadway shows, all of which are in that district by definition, is up 19%.
Wow, that's significant. That's significant. I haven't driven in Midtown, but I got some anecdotal stories. I was just had an airport run with a driver that has a car service, and he talked about being in Midtown and how the traffic is much lighter, significantly so.
And there are fewer people driving and needing parking spaces, so the parking spaces are still ridiculously expensive, but they've come down a fair amount. Next surprising story. The woolly mice. We've talked on the show before about how there's a serious group of people with millions of dollars trying to bring back the woolly mammoth. What they intend to do is take the mammoth, and the elephants are very close, and use a live female elephant and do some fancy genetic engineering to put in genes that make it much more like the woolly mammoth. And they know a whole lot of them. Well, along the way to doing that, they have created a new breed of woolly mice that by altering 4 genes in mice, suddenly they start growing a whole lot of hair, just like woolly mammoth.
Wow.
You don't know whether they'll get the woolly mammoths back in my lifetime. I'm sure they're not going to be able to bring in all the creatures from Jurassic Park, but gene engineering is something.
Yeah, just the fact that they're doing it, Dave, and they are having some success, that could be a indicator of where we're going down the road, possibilities.
And the last one we want to give is that we've talked on the show about how it's now possible to cure sickle cell, Tay-Sachs disease, and some other genetic diseases already. Not everything, but some. We just had somebody that they were working on, I think, for sickle cell with the version of genetic areas, who died from the treatment. So when we talked about this, it is a wonderful advance. But what they have right now is a very dangerous procedure that knocks out your immune system and could kill you. But sickle cell anemia is so hard to treat in some people that people want to take that risk. The gene engineering is getting there. It is curing diseases. and it's getting better. Well, there's a lab at Stanford that has 100 biologists and doctors working.
Yeah.
The, the,
I know that we've been talking about it, and you've been following this for some time, Dave, and that this is the first death that we have reported on. I think, sad and significant, but nevertheless, I think that may not be a bad number, given, all the successes that gene therapy has had.
and what that means for our listeners who will be thinking of it, think really hard, get the best evidence, the best doctors, best biologists, best geneticists who can tell you what the odds are, whether it makes sense. It's a wonderful advance that they can do this now. It's fascinating science.
Mhm.
And there was another Nobel Prize winner for doing this.
Mhm.
And and the AI is making it much better, it looks like, at least in the lab.
Okay.
But it's dangerous, and be careful.
Mhm.
So next week, well, I bet we'll find something interesting to tell them.
I'm sure we will, Dave. I mean, stuff is moving so fast on the political scene, on the technology scene, on the AI scene. So it's hard to even lay out the shows. But this is where you're going to hear about it and where you're going to learn about what's going on. This has been Community Technology. Dave Burstein and Stu Reed on WHCR 90.3 FM every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Not only on 90.3 FM, but also on the web at WHCR.org. Tune in every Wednesday, 5 to 6. You just might learn something. Thanks. See you next week.